right, welcome back to the Mind of Dave. I'm your host, Dr. Dave, and with me today in the studio is Adam Russell. And a quick intro, I'm super excited for this. He's most proud of being a mountaineer and naturalist for the past 10 years, and it's taken him all over the North Cascades, Kenya, Alaska, Nepal. His formal bio, if you want to call it, is he's actually an ecologist, explorer, and an educator, and he's taught thousands of people from across the world, which is super exciting. He brings such a rich experience. And now he's helping the Earth with regenerative and holistic management, a.k.a. trying to make soil healthy again. And that's actually where we had met. Just a fun, quick story. About a month and a half ago, we met at a permaculture blitz, which is where you get a community together and you actually help an individual plant trees, plant food, do all of the great things that community can do for us and those heavy, intensive projects. And his company, Symbiosis, was actually leading the charge on that. And so we came across each other, somehow got into conversations about Leonardo da Vinci, living water, tattoos, mountaineering, like all this crazy stuff. I'm like, I've got to get this person on the podcast to share this with the world because he comes with such a journey and such an experience. So welcome, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with favorite food, favorite drink, and tell us the story behind it so that we get to know you a little bit.
You know, I'd probably have to say that my favorite food has been a birthday favorite for as long as I can remember, and it's pasta carbonara. You know, you take the hot pasta, you drop it in uncooked scrambled eggs. The heat of the pasta cooks the eggs, and then you throw bacon, parsley, and cheese in it.
Oh, I've never actually even had that.
Oh, I love it. It's an amazing like evening savory dinner. You know, you can have it with wine and fancy it up, but then it's just as good cold the next morning. It's like an Italian breakfast taco, just like bacon, egg, cheese on a carbohydrate medium that's fun to get into you.
Oh my gosh! And so you have that for your birthday every year?
Many years, or at least around that area. And it's just a fun, quick meal when, you know, needing some comfort food, gotten beat up by a physical project. It's just like a big powerhouse of a nice little carbohydrate explosion.
Yeah.
And, so I love it. That's been in the repertoire. Mom's been making that as long as I can remember.
Oh, no kidding. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I now have a new recipe to try.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, just a little salt and pepper at the end, and that's all you need. Pretty simple, just a couple ingredients.
So do you make that when you come off of the mountain, when you come from extreme expeditions? Is that like your go-to, like, I survived and I'm going to have my good meal now?
Exactly. You know, getting, packing on weight and carb loading beforehand, coming back. It's just like I could eat that meal every day of the year.
Got it. Well, let's get into that right away because that sounds like a fun topic that I don't think a lot of people have heard before. So you pack on weight before you hop into the mountains, right? Describe that process of getting ready for mountaineering.
Oh gosh, I was just in that mindset yesterday. As a good friend is planning to climb Mount Waddington this summer. With the shifting towards regenerative agriculture, I've been putting my mind and body towards that more recently. But the last expedition that I had in 2017 was we walked from the northern tip to the southern tip of Iceland, just recently after going up to Everest Base Camp to help my friend Melissa Arnott become the first American female to summit without oxygen. I didn't summit, but I was just there as support to help her out, to be medical support, to be base camp support. And it was just a really rich journey to be part of after she had been working on that goal for 15 years.
Oh, wow.
How does it work? I mean, first, someone has the crazy idea, I think that's what I love. That's what I love about mountaineering and alpinism is someone has some harebrained, wild concept and finds an image of a wild place with a route. And that route is, it's a series of runnels of snow and rock and ridges and seams and cracks. And it just allows your mind to go into this incredible Rubik's Cube puzzle solving place. And then as you, kind of process through the intellectual puzzle solving, gear, time, food, people, team of it all, then it really you kind of shift into this emotional aspect of like, okay, well, if this is a thing that's about to happen, because logistically it looks like it's possible, now I really got to wrap my mind and heart and soul around how do I release all the pre-programmed fears and limited beliefs to actually allow myself to do those things.
Wow.
And then for just physical, putting on backpacks and carrying them and hiking and getting stronger and just eating anything and everything with carbohydrates and fat and not caring about any form of diet, just putting on any form of weight whatsoever, because you're going to lose 10 to 20 pounds along the way.
Wow. Well, let's hop back into the fear part real quick, because I think that really stuck out in my brain as humans. We want to initially just go for what is the tactics and the strategy, right? Like what workout am I going to do? What route map and things like that. But the reality is that the fear is the biggest thing to overcome with anything, right? Starting something new, whether you're going up a mountain or you're going to go sign up at the gym, there's this fear aspect. So what is it the culture does? What does the mountaineering culture do to help people overcome their fear of, obviously there's probably a roller coaster of waves of fear that come, a year before, a day before, there are different types of fears. How do you overcome that?
Well, I think when I first moved into that world, I was looking for two things. I was considering going into the military because I really sought out that brotherhood, that sisterhood of being arm in arm with someone, and they are you and you are them, and you'd do anything for them, and that you could count on them for anything. And finishing college, there's so much programming of what it is to be a male or what it is to be a female, how to interact in the world, what your self-worth is based upon. And when I finished school, it was just this feeling of like, I'm so riddled to the brim with cultural non-functional programming of go to bars and meet people and do things that I just knew that I needed to go into the mountains where things were real, and to learn who I actually was aside from upbringing and messaging and parents and peers, and go find out what was real in the world. Because I didn't know what path to go, but I just, after going through a couple of the different, religious and cultural and mythical texts, it seemed like everybody who had real, truthful wisdom went into the desert or into the mountains for 40 days or 40 years or something. There's, just endless narrative and myth around this concept of person goes into wilderness, has experience, comes back with real knowledge and guides people in a general direction of truth. And, so it seems like that, I was like, well, all the wise people came from the wilderness, so off I go.
Yeah, got it. And so that helps you overcome that fear of actually getting started, as the drive of self-exploration was greater than the actual fear of doing it. Absolutely.
And once you get into it, it's this feeling of like, well, I've started this path, and now I'm full of fear. So how do I just keep going? And I think that's the beauty of mountaineering is if you're doing it right, you're finding people that share that self-discovery and desire to explore wild places, and you get to push yourself physically and emotionally and mentally through the whole thing. Some days they're carrying you, and other days you're carrying them, and you're just breaking down and sharing what's real with each other every day.
Yeah. And do you have, when you're actually doing some training, like when you were helping that female American get to Everest, did you start like a year in advance together where you kind of create this tribe of this community of training, or is it like you just show up and you both know you're kick-ass people that are going to support each other and it's an immediate bond kind of thing?
Yeah. I'd known Melissa for years before that particular trip, and I happened to be in Kenya at the time. I just recently climbed Mount Kenya, and so I had all my climbing gear with me on that side of the planet, never having been to Nepal. So I just happened to reach out and say, hey, I'm on this side of the planet, and you spent a lot of time in Nepal. Any reason why I should go there, do a trek, do something, any suggestions? And she said, actually, I'm showing up in 2 weeks to try this no oxygen attempt, and I could use an extra, supportive hand that's trustworthy. So I said, all right, I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so that layer upon layer of trust had already been built, and you can just show up and do those things. That's incredible. Yeah. What's it like then from the bonding standpoint? How quickly does it seem like it meshes together when a group of, I would assume you had probably 10, 15 people show up to provide support? Like, how is that mold together so quickly?
For her particular expedition, it was only about 4 of us.
Oh, wow.
Plus overall support, you're right, there were probably another 5 people: kitchen staff, cook staff, logistics. Definitely need to keep them in the equation. Let's see, how does it work? It works different every time. I think what I've realized over time is it's so important to sit down and basically move through the holistic management process of like, what are our goals, and do we share the same goals? Over time, I've realized that everyone assumes that everyone else sees the world that they do until you get into some hardship, and then you quickly realize that the reason for what people are doing can be vastly different than your reasoning for doing the exact same thing.
Interesting.
And so, one example is climbing in Yosemite and trying to climb the nose for the first time, which we weren't successful on. And my goal was learning and a new experience and exploration and discovery. And my partner's was really to be able to say that he had done it, to have the photo and to share it with people. And he'd already told people that he was going to do it. And so it got into this pretty spicy, dangerous place of, we have to do it because I've told people I was going to do it. And it wasn't fun any longer. It was too scary.
Yeah.
To be totally honest. We were going too slow and just weren't as good of climbers as we thought at that time. And so when we finally got into the reason of why are we even here in the first place, we saw that our reasoning was so vastly different that we were like, you know what? We're going to go ahead and use our safety word and rappel off of this situation.
Yeah, and get back down. Wow.
Yeah, so just find that now we'll just start with the goals. What's everyone's reason for doing this? And let's be incredibly clear about that. And what's everyone's threshold for risk? And why is that? And at what point do we just say, it's been a good journey and let's go home and try this again another day?
Wow. How often is that actually happen, where you get up there and it's way more challenging than anticipated and you got to back down?
All total with every climb I've ever done, we probably are successful maybe 2/3 of the time.
Okay.
So there's a significant amount that's, and I've been really grateful to have partners that have agreed that for any reason at any time, if someone has a dream, a feeling, an intuition, whatever, for any reason unexplainable, that anybody can just call it at any time. We'll just pack up, go home, have a beer, watch a movie, enjoy each other's company, and nothing's worth pushing through.
Wow. Just
absolute nightmare and losing friends over it.
Yeah, though that's so intense to think about, of like that pact, that bond that you have to have in order to trust that person, that when they say that they're done and you've got a ton more left in you, that it's still a pack mentality. You can't just go up there solo. I mean, some people obviously go up solo, but
sure. Yeah, that's a whole other world.
Yeah, that's a whole other world. But the packness, the beauty of bringing people together that way, that's an amazing feat. That's you're inspiring me. I can tell you, I've had some loose dealings with climbing very small mountains and getting into the expedition mountaineering side of it. But I haven't, this is one of the things I was so excited to talk about, is like I haven't made that jump over into actually doing it and actually educating myself on it. So you're enticing me in with this camaraderie side of it. That's why I always played club sports. That's why I always played rugby and football and those sorts of things.
Sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, growing up, I played football and lacrosse, and just love that camaraderie, and you're doing it for the team, and the team succeeds, whereas the individual will, ruin all things if it tries to become about one person rather than the whole. And that's the piece that I really craved after growing up in the American culture, which is very individual based. You get the trophy, you win first place. Even though your cooperation of training with everyone else led to this once moment of a first place trophy, that moment is heralded and put across papers instead of the intense amount of cooperation that's gone into it. And
right.
That cooperation is just what feeds me. It feels like being part of a tribe, being part of an actual functioning culture.
Have you experienced that, obviously at a whole new level, when you go to these places around the world? Is that really did it confirm your thoughts of that, or did you already, did that come through the process of exploring the world, the way that you speak about this?
It was always a feeling of, why are we so focused on competition when cooperation is what drives most things? I think when I got into college and started down the path of ecology, one thing that I really loved about it was the thing didn't matter. The fox or the rabbit didn't matter, but it was the relationship between them that mattered. Too many foxes kill all the rabbits die, all the foxes starve, and then the cycle continues again. No foxes, lots of rabbits, this ebb and flow of species. But what really mattered was the invisible link between the things, whether the things are people or economies or rabbits and foxes. The things didn't matter that much, but it was the relationship between them. And so I've just always been curious about the world of relationships.
Well, that explains a lot on why you got into restoring soil health and permaculture. So that's a foundation.
Yeah. I mean, talk about just being able to leverage relationships and building relationships with people, place, land, biodiversity, charismatic megafauna, bison animal grazing systems, to the microbiology of the soil. And you're able to manipulate entire universes of soil organisms, which is a pretty fun thing to think about when you really start to conceptualize the impact of one or two small individuals putting water and minerals in the right place that can have an impact for generations.
Well, and I think it's such an easy example, too, of when we hear of things like the Dust Bowl. Coming from the monoculture world, we have all of these real-world experiments that have gone wrong, and while we educate people on that happened, we turn around and still do monoculture agriculture. And permaculture, for those that don't know, food forest restoration, regenerative soil, there's this big lump and category of this movement that is exactly what we're talking about, this a natural way to have things communicate and live together in an ecosystem that actually are beneficial. And now that we have the science behind it, we can actually put two plants together that we know actually help each other. Because we have the science. So let's dive into that. How did that? I mean, obviously, as an ecologist, you had a little premonition towards it, but how did you discover your path towards regenerative soil? How did you discover that path towards permaculture?
I'd say probably two things. One, when I was living up in the North Cascades, teaching as a naturalist and climbing as much as possible, we talked a lot about climate change and what the small individual can do, and a lot of the leading message was turn off the water when you brush your teeth and change your light bulbs. And it was this overwhelming feeling of, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
People come in for this unbelievable wilderness, soul-shifting experience, and then they leave with, do less while brushing your teeth. It's like, this is not it. There's so much more that
Yep.
the small individual can be doing to support the global system whole. And so one of our speakers was into native edible medicinal foraging, and he really brought an indigenous perspective of this idea of, we think of the indigenous in the Northwest as hunter-gatherers going out and grabbing a couple berries, but really they weren't hunter-gatherers. They were agroforestry farmers, and instead of picking a couple high-brush cranberries or black walnuts and bringing them back, they would harvest the whole tree and bring it back to the area where they planted those cranberries in wet areas and planted the pecans and the walnuts and the camas fields for starchy potato-like material. And so when they went for the harvest, they were going into permaculture, agroforestry, perennial polycultural systems that they had manipulated over centuries and generations. And so they didn't go look for a couple potatoes. They went to a massive field that had been stewarded for generations to harvest, just like we harvest a field that's been cultivated. They just cultivated perennials as opposed to annuals. So that really shifted my mind of, oh my God, if we're talking about a carbon problem, and the greatest carbon sink on the planet is the soil, well, then that's the solution. And that's something that me as the small individual can do. When you really look at Aldo Leopold's notion of it takes I think in the Sand County Almanac, he's got this eloquent prose of it takes 1,000 years to create an inch of topsoil. When you really get into permaculture and holistic management and integrated grazing systems with remineralization and all the different fun, wonderful biodynamic tools that we have available, you can build an inch of soil in a very short amount of time. So that just really inspired me to hey, let's go ahead and sequester some carbon in the soils and build more nutrient-dense food for people to eat, to then think differently because their bodies are fully nourished. And they're able to pursue their own purpose because they're not overweight and malnourished simultaneously. And then let people just follow their own initiatives and their own kind of purpose to fix whatever they find drawn to fix.
Interesting. And so what, if you could go back into time into that retreat that you were talking about and the conversation, so instead of the saving water during toothbrush, now that people have an awareness of this, what is the one practical tip that they can do?
I think the best piece that I really followed from one of my favorite authors, Buckminster Fuller, was listen deeply to that small voice that lives inside of you and follow what your initiative tells you to do. Because there's no catch-all, we should all be doing this thing. It's like follow your inner drives. Be strong and courageous enough to follow that out. If you feel compelled to do a thing, and that thing it doesn't hurt anyone, and it's consensual between all parties, and it potentially benefits the world around you, go do that thing. And then on the other side of that thing, there's going to be another inner drive, and do that thing. And before you know it, you're going to be just fearlessly, courageously moving through the world, being navigated by your own intuitive guidance. And then you'll kind of be driven by this force outside of, I should do this because of the climate. I should do this because my parents say I need a 401k. I should do this because everyone's got 1,000 different reasons behind that.
Beautiful. I feel like there's a few T-shirt ideas that just came out of that conversation. Be fearless and follow your passions, right?
That's right. Bumper stickers.
Yeah. Oh, man. That's super interesting. Well, I'm going to follow my passion here and get a little greedy on the time equation of podcasting. Let's dive into some living water structures. You and I had some great conversations. So real quick for people, what is your definition of living water, and why is it important, and what can we all do about it?
That's a great question. In my journey, I had that exact same question. What is this? I've heard of this, but so what I did was pick up different religious books, like the Bible. I was like, all right, I've heard of this living water thing. You see religious retreats named that. And so I started looking, and there was no water on these living water religious retreat sites. It was just a name. It was just a word that they were using. So I flipped through the Bible, and every context where those words were used, there was something about someone stirring the water in movement, the water in flow. So then the other piece of the North Cascades really taught me, in a place where water defines that entire landscape, you're always around moving, flowing, falling, waterfalls, cascades, glaciers, that I would define living water as something that's moving, it's mineralized, it's flowing in a natural order. It's not just being harshly pumped through 90-degree elbows and sitting darkly underground, but flowing, moving, and people in natural systems are able to interact with it in ways. So, if you scour the internet, there are 100 different things that do that, devices and pieces you attach in line. But a lot of it at the fundamental level is water is this consciousness carrying medium. So whether you buy a thing and attach it to your plumbing system, or just hold that, water glass and just, gently give a little bit of gratitude to it, and appreciate the journey that it's been on up into the upper stratosphere and down into the Gobi Desert, and then back up into the upper stratosphere and through the oceans and into the rivers and through 100,000 people's different capillary systems and out their urine and into the soil and back into this glass somehow. That's an incredible appreciation for a substance that all of us rely on. And in that gratitude, I believe that water shifts its structure to be more beneficial. Because if you really distill out what a human being is, we're about 99% oxygen and hydrogen molecules in some configuration structured of water, with a couple, 1% of salts, metals, and some carbon spiced in there. But we're mostly water. Structured, moving, gelatinous water. It's conscious of itself.
Interesting. Yeah, I love your take on it. For me, it's I first learned about it from my biochemistry background, and it was purely like a chemical side of things. When I was in college, we had these structure conversations of what are the different phases of water, and they're like, oh, by the way, there's all this weird stuff with water that we can't explain. And so I had an awareness of it, and then it wasn't until I was like out on a hike, and I remember just being super thirsty, and someone was like, oh, let's make some living water. And I was like, living water, you mean like the structured water thing? And they're like, yeah, you got to take it from the swirls out of the river. And when I had that, and I felt it absorb through my body differently than anything else I had experienced. And I literally could feel it go through my body and suck into the cells and muscles because I felt dehydrated. I was like, living water. Oh, that's
right.
it.
Experiential education.
Experiential, yeah. And I'm a very much mind education kind of person, but also I really value the experience to put that education to. And I just never tried real living water knowingly, and man, that was what solidified my path. And then the weirdness of when I started really diving into Leonardo da Vinci's background and how he first described living water, and that was his favorite thing to draw, was actually the swirls and the eddies. and he related it to how the heart valves work. He related it to engineering for mass cities. And it was all around the structure of how to keep living water happen, because back then they obviously knew that you didn't get disease and all of those sorts of things. Yeah, so that's where my path. And so now describe to me, there was some really cool thing, gadget gizmo at description that people can find on Mind of Dave.
So those flow forms were started by a group of Austrians who started looking at the form in the body, in our organ systems, and wondering about how does flow follow form. And so they took, in the particular basins that I have, are a cross-section of the sinus of Valsalva, the very last valved structure where oxygenated blood is leaving the heart. And when they sliced it open and moved water through it, they noticed, as Leonardo da Vinci did, this very interesting fluid enters a chamber, and then it starts to pulse rhythmically back and forth in this laminar flow, meaning that it's going from this chaotic form to aligning, and then it moves through a vortex, and the whole thing is pulsing rhythmically back and forth, and then compressing. So you're taking oxygen and taking it from this large bubble, aligning it, and then compressing it. And so those oxygen bubbles just continue to get smaller and smaller and smaller, get more and more and more compressed into solution. And so I started using flow forms because in all the text I could find, it was the most effective way to oxygenate a pond. And I was getting into this permaculture systems and earthworks and building ponds. And once you have the pond, so many ponds just sit there with kind of a scum on top, non-oxygenated and dead. So it was just this kind of whole piece of, you can't drive a dozer for a month and build a pond if you don't know how to continue to keep that pond a living water. Right. And so this was a potential option of attaching a small solar panel, a pump, and just cycling water, lifting it and dropping it through flow forms.
Nice. Got it. Yeah, it was such a crazy cool setup. It was very intriguing. Okay. And then, so have you found, because you guys were using some sort of compost tea, when you guys go to plant and things like that, describe for everyone, why does it matter that we're putting this into the soil when we go to make plants, and what does that do for the ecosystem of those plants?
Sure, good question. Well, one is we're really trying, when we have that moment of planting, we're trying to maximize that open hole that we're putting a single tree into. And so the compost tea, we're really building a strong fungal colony and population, a strong bacterial population. We're feeding those with fermented fish and molasses and ocean minerals. And so as that tree goes in the ground, it also enters the ground with the entire population and community that's going to support its root structure, so that we're getting the most impact in that moment, instead of putting a tree in and then it struggles and then we try to nurse it along for years. And so part of those flow forms is it helps us build a hyper-oxygenated community. And then the last piece is oxygen is the most highly paramagnetic material out there. Paramagnetism is something that's often associated with granite and basalt stones, and one of the reasons why they're built in all these different sacred sites and pyramids around the world, because they have this quality that encourages life. So you're getting all this abundance of richness and life and putting it in the hole when the plant gets planted.
Nice, yeah.
And then, as you mentioned, planting that tree with other plants that are companions with it. And so you're just layering on community on top of community, cooperation on top of cooperation, and the whole system thrives very quickly as soon as it's established.
Yeah, beautiful. And so what are your thoughts then, too, about including the mycelium, the fungal network? Some people listening may have heard that we're one gigantic fungus across the earth. What are your thoughts on getting that going, and how does all this work? Like, when we say the word regenerative soil, how does this ecosystem actually look?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, mycelium is that fungal root structure that's so important. It's the internet connectivity that connects all the other living components of the ecosystem in there. So, just like we could all live in beautiful homes and have the food that we need, but if we don't have connectivity with each other, we can't barter and sell and trade and communicate. And that's really what the mycelium allows. As well as it allows, the mycelium is moving in the soil. It's helping break down stones and rock and bedrock and making available these strange deep soil minerals and materials. And then they're traded with bacteria and roots, and they just allow the entire structure to thrive. They increase water absorption of the tree massively. So we can put everything in the soil, but if it doesn't have that mycelial connection, so we typically use Advancing Eco-Agricultural's product, BioCoat Gold, which is one specific type of inoculant we found it to just be really wonderful in getting systems established quickly.
Nice, and that loops it back to that growing an inch of soil can happen pretty quickly, and I'm assuming you have to have all those ingredients.
Exactly, because when we think about, how do we get soil, we often don't think about every piece of foliage that's green out there is photosynthesizing. It's got chloroplasts driving chlorophyll. They're taking random photons from the sun. They're combining it, cohering it into a polysaccharide sugar, like a maple syrup type sugar substance, and injecting that into the soil. And so 50 to 80% of the sugar that a tree or a plant or a grass blade makes is being injected into the soil to feed the biology, the fungus, the bacterias, which are then growing, reproducing, dying, and building soil from below upwards.
You just reminded me of my kids and I were watching a documentary yesterday of a nature photographer, and he was doing something on his land, and he has a type of ants. I don't even remember what type of ants they were, but they actually herd and farm aphids. They bring aphids to the best part of the plant so that these aphids feed off of this plant, and then they produce a sugary syrup that the ants eat, and they collect, and in return the ants protect the aphids from ladybugs. And my whole family and I, we were just blown away. We were had to pause and rewind it a few times. You're telling me ants farm aphids? Yeah, nature.
And I mean, yeah, leafcutter ants are some of the greatest fungal farmers on the planet.
Okay, describe that. What? Obviously, we've all seen the picture of leafcutters where it's these big ass leaves on a tiny little ant that's got a chew mark out of it.
Sure. So I mean, boy, ants is a whole podcast of its own. I had the privilege of studying an ant mound in the Ecuadorian Amazon for a month, and basically they'll send out various different castes of ants to find specific leaves where fungus grows appropriately on, and as they bring those leaves back, there's basically a smaller ant at the ant mound saying yes, no, that one can come in, that one cannot go in.
Really?
Because some leaves have different toxins and things that aren't beneficial to this type of fungus that they're growing. So they're bringing in these specific leaves, bringing it down to these fungal growing chambers where an even smaller type of ant is the real fungal grower, moving small pieces of fungus from one growing area, inoculating those leaves, and then the entire mound consumes the fungus. They're not actually eating those leaves. They're using those leaves to grow fungus on.
No
and
kidding.
So they have whole garbage areas where they throw out the leaves that didn't, get inspected appropriately.
Oh my gosh.
It's a beautiful hive mind social insect structure that's, there's so many metaphors towards our human culture that you can take from ants. It's
wow.
Pretty amazing.
Interesting. Wow, I'm going to let that soak in for a second. That's insane. I mean, as much as I've been watching nature shows since I was a little kid, and I've never actually seen that whole sequence of events. That's crazy. Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
So how can people get involved with this side of life, essentially? Obviously earlier we talked about just finding your passions and things like that, but what is it like, say a person is, now that they're having an awareness of this, what are some of these easy steps, that the low-hanging fruit that people can take to get into this world of regenerative soil, regenerative, how can the average person help?
My simple answer is kale. Grow kale, because kale is pretty indestructible, and you can experiment on it 100 different ways, and you can see the difference. Throw some Miracle Grow on one, and throw biodynamic preparations and mycelial spores and bacterias and bokashi, just start experimenting with real living things that you can taste and notice what you notice. I think kale is a great place to start because it's durable, it survives freezes, and it'll give you promise and hope that you can grow a thing. So many people say, I don't have a green thumb.
Yep.
And sure, I've killed more things than anybody. I just keep killing things.
Yep.
But I just keep learning more from every time that I attempt a new strategy. And then once you start to grow something and you have, you're a steward of that living organism, you'll just generally, at least I have felt generally compelled to keep that thing surviving. As soon as someone has one bite off of the thing that you're growing, they want more. And so then you feel compelled to grow more. So then permaculture is an incredible framework. The Agrarians is someone who's working at scale with land and people. It's a wonderful framework to pull all these disparate pieces into a coherent algorithm to know what decision to make next, because there are so many decisions to make. And I think the last piece is just knowing that each one of us is incredibly important and needed and useful. Like no one can do this by themselves.
Yep.
And whoever's out there possibly listening to this thing, you've come across this for a very specific reason, and you are incredibly needed and necessary and important to the solutions moving forward. Whatever feels compelling, intuitive to you and your inner guidance of, I feel like I could contribute in this way, then do that, because that thing is needed. The more that we can connect our own networks of networks and systems of systems and become that ant mound that is a superorganism communicating efficiently and frictionless across vast spaces of planet Earth, and sharing, hey, I tried this and it worked, I tried this and it didn't work. Sharing those failures is the most important piece. Failing faster is the most important piece, not being, trying to move away from this schooling that we've all gotten of if you get less than an A plus,
right,
you did wrong. And just fail hard, fail fast, and share your failures with everyone so that we can all learn and collectively move forward with what actually does work.
Speaking of this, obviously I know you have a company here in Austin, Texas, where we met. What's your favorite technology source, and does this exist from the standpoint of, for some reason, I personally haven't found it yet, of like, if you think of a social media app where I can go on and I can talk to all the neighbors of Austin to be like, this is the type of tomato that we can grow in Austin, Texas. This works for this, and oh, by the way, there's this freeze coming up, so what should we all do in Austin, Texas? Does this type of technology exist? Please help me.
There are a couple different networks here. There's the Austin Permaculture Guild. Symbiosis has a lot of institutional knowledge that we're happy to share. As we're getting these bigger and bigger systems, we're trying to create standard operating systems of what we've learned over the years to share with others who are at smaller scale, or maybe a school or a church or something that can't afford much, but they have a great desire to do these types of things. There's not an app that I know of that's kind of a hive mind, but that may be the thing that is yours to build.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we'll do a call out to everyone that I know. If you want to do some app development, then.
Yeah, and that's kind of our in the notion of anticipatory design. We know that someone will create that in the next few years, and so we're really focused on doing the best methods, capturing the best methods, and sharing the best methods, so that at some point when someone can share those wider, faster, quicker, more efficiently, we'll actually have real information to share. Because as you dig into YouTube and the permaculture world, there's 100,000 opinions on how to do it and what's right and what's wrong. But not all of it is specific to the Austin, Texas context of clay soils on one side and limestone soils on the other. Context is key to all of these systems.
Yep. Same with health and wellness. It was one of the biggest annoying things of the internet that I saw as a doctor is people have this one genetic makeup, and then they come to me with this plan that is designed for like Eskimos, right? I'm sorry, that just doesn't match your genetics. That doesn't match your context. And we have to have this context. And I always found it weird, like even if you go to a local grocery or a local garden store here, that there isn't an overabundance of like, this is Austin, this is how you grow in Austin, like pamphlets and books. Like authors and people should like be totally in your own area. You can become your local expert and just create a how-to manual. It'd be so simple. So maybe that's how people contribute is instead of going and building an inch of soil on their land, they just go out and make some books of collect the experiences around. Like maybe they're a writer or technologist. Go collect the experiences in your local area and put a guide together for people.
And I would say as far as guides go, I think the first step to knowing your context is taking and sending off a soil sample to someone like Logan Labs or Texas Plant Lab down in Harlingen, and knowing what you're dealing with. One thing that I've realized after thinking of, I just need to do this or I just need to do that. This book says this and that book says that. You can have two soils 100 feet apart from each other that need completely different strategies. So you just don't know until you test your specific soils and create a solution to affect that specific context.
Yep. Yeah, I have that firsthand experience on my current land. I have a little 2-acre plot and trying to do, get my hands dirty in this. And some fig trees that we planted some on the front end of the property that looked like there was good soil. But we have a whole river system in our backyard, and it gets flooded all the time. And I just assumed that soil would be good. And both plantings failed. Of like when I go back and I started digging through some of the stuff of like, maybe I should have done some more prep work. I realize now that the soil has almost nothing in it, which is surprising to me because being from Wisconsin, if you're next to a river, you've got all of the soil that you need. But here in Texas, it's a different story.
Sure. And, one thing that it does have in it, the question is, where did that soil come from? Like, is it eroding the hill country, which is probably limestone, which is incredibly high in calcium? And so if you test it, it's going to be incredibly high in calcium, which tends to bind up things. And so the beauty of limestone is everything is in it. You just have to unlock it because there's so much calcium that it's bound and locked up. And so, typically we'll be using things like, we know that, if calcium is this massive school bus that drives nutrients across membranes, then in the soil context, at least, you need boron to be that school bus driver to actually allow the calcium to become mobile. And you need sulfur to dissolve out the calcium, to drop the pH level, to basically dissolve the edges. So now with just like a little bit of appropriate, adding of things, you dissolve it, you allow more surface area to arrive in the system so that things can start mingling, life can start interacting, and now with a little bit of boron, now that calcium can become mobile and start to shift and move those nutrients that are actually there. But if, so many soils are just bound up because they have too much of something or too little of one critical chain of events, and it just stops the whole system from moving.
Oh, interesting. Well, and I can definitely tell your educator mentality comes out when you start labeling chemicals as school buses. That's awesome. Where all have you taught, by the way? Where has been the best place? What has been the fun experiences for you of teaching? Because I can see the passion come out.
Oh, gosh. Being in the wilderness of the North Cascades with children and adults was just incredible. When I shifted over to work with Remote Medical International, I had the honor of working with special forces groups for 3 years, teaching a austere medical course, and so it was all of the knowledge that we had, but compressed into half the time, because all those people are trying to learn as fast as possible to then go utilize that knowledge as quickly as possible. So what I loved about that, it was this immediate application of very tangible skills that could make a life or death decision. And so it really made things real, and I think I've just taken that urgency and effectiveness and clarity of conversation into the regenerative agriculture world of, hey, like, everybody's not seeing it, but this is an absolute triage, global disaster level situation where we need to all get focused, all get communicating, and start moving forward strategies that are effective to fix our soils right now. Because I'm sure as a medical doctor, when you look at the amount of chronic and critical illnesses across all ages, it's absolutely devastating to look at the data.
Yep. Yeah, that's where my passions behind all this actually came from. Is I lost my health personally, went through severe burnout hell, and just kept asking questions. And I kept getting into food, and then I was like, well, why is this food so shitty, and why does it not taste good? And then it was like this blend. It became this blend of passion and medical that led me to soil. And I was like, soil is the thing. And yeah, two of the same end results with two very different paths.
Mm-hmm. But it all came from a digging for the root. Where's the root of this problem?
Yep.
And it always leads back to soil. And you can take it 100 different ways once you've arrived at the soil. And I think that's what really excites me about this type of work, is no matter your religious, political belief structure, every single person on the planet can get behind soil and nourishing foods for their children and a better life for all, no matter what part of the spectrum you're on. And it's it's really rich to find that moment of connection.
Yeah. Yeah, lately there's been a lot of missing links. People don't realize the amount of desert that's forming in the world. And the political boundaries are finally starting to get taken down from the standpoint of these huge, I think it was China just this past year spent $13 billion planting grasses in their desert so that they could stop the desertification coming across. And so I'm excited for that political, economic world to start taking shape. Some people are finally noticing this. But again, it comes down to soil.
And in Africa, there's the Great Green Wall Initiative that's worth looking into. Super inspiring to see that, there's thousands of people across all of Africa reversing the Sahara. That's not something we hear about every day.
Can the average person fly over there and help? Can they go be part of that?
I'm sure in some form or fashion.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure how the structure of it's all working, but any project of that scale, I guarantee is distributed leadership. And, as a person who desires to do that, I'd find which is the most stable socio-political place and go find an organization there and go for it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's probably a lot in your local area, too.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's where, after traveling a lot myself, I found that if I'm really going to be effective, I need to learn about my context at my home and do that, because I can be this, there's that missionary savior mentality of I'm going to come from somewhere else and fix your problems in some random part of the world. and not know any part of your context and give you solutions that don't do anything and no one knows how to use. But I pat myself on the back and think I did a great job. So yeah, start at your home, start in your backyard, cut water bottles in half and fill them with dirt and grow things in them in your windowsill and just get curious about the whole thing.
Yeah, I love Go ahead.
Oh, I know that one of the experiments that just has always been a foundation is putting a bean in a Ziploc bag.
Yep.
And just watching it every day.
My kids did that this year for their homeschooling project. Yep, and it turned into a big vine that grew beans.
It's amazing, and the sheer awe and curiosity that goes into that little mind is just, you just started a wildfire of curiosity.
Yeah, beautiful. I was going to say, I love your idea about the kale. I never thought about that. I've always told people to just, plant an herb in your house and get one herb going so that you can actually taste the benefits of your hard work, not a plant that doesn't reward you in a way. But kale being so indestructible, that's such a better recommendation. I think I'm going to start using that.
And as someone who's done any one of these experiments, I'd throw on top of it, go and get yourself the Maria Thune North American Biodynamic Calendar if you're in North America, which gives you a larger global context of depending on where moons and planets and large celestial objects are, and plant the same thing on a shoot day, a root day, a fruit day, and a flower day, and notice what happens. And I'll just throw out, if you plant a radish on a root day, you're going to get a huge radish. If you plant a radish or a beet on a green day, you're going to get a massive head of greens and a very small beet or radish. And so there you can really see the greater context, even outside of planet Earth, in this interconnected celestial system that we are part of, impact what we're doing. Yeah. So doing the right thing at the right time starts to make a lot more difference than just doing a lot of it.
Yep. Yeah, and it's I just had this conversation with someone the other day in regards to health. Our bodies are very polarity based. Plants are very polarity based, and they were they were trying to claim the BS thing about when the full moon on crazy people come out during the full moon and why would you go charge your water on the full moon? They didn't really have any of that concept. I was like, well, what do you think the tides of the ocean are? It's this polarity that happens that when the moon is actually closer, we have a polarity change that starts to, this magnetism that starts to get moved around. And so everything gets affected in one way or another. When you cut yourself from a medical standpoint, you can heal it faster by applying certain polarities to it. And this is what a bone stimulator is in the hospital. You can break a bone and you can heal it faster under magnetism. And so there's all these examples so I'll put the link in there. What was it called again? The biodynamic?
The biodynamic calendar, the Maria Thune biodynamic calendar. There are a handful of different calendars, but I personally find that one to be the easiest to understand.
Very cool. Interesting. Well, perfect. Thank you. Is there anything else that you feel like was left unsaid, or anything of that nature that you still want to share?
The only thing I can think of is just this soil conversation that we're having is welcome to absolutely everyone. Whatever your skill set, whatever your passion, Dave, just like this, you took the initiative to tell my story, and I really appreciate it. And I hope that someone hears it and joins the party. The more of us that are doing this and excited and learning and have people to share what we're learning with and our failures and successes with, it just turns this larger social narrative from doom and gloom, bad news, to, oh my gosh, have you heard about this organization doing this thing, regreening the desert, regreening Asia, growing food forests and nutrient-dense foods in Central Texas. It's a really potent, powerful, rich, fun time to be part of right now.
It really is. Wow. That's inspirational. Thank you. For those listening, the Mind of Dave is the site where all this is going to be posted to check out all these wonderful links. And I think you heard it best from Adam that just get out there and start doing this. Overcome that fear. Get that one thing going towards that passion that you want. Adam, thank you so much for sharing all this. This is such a beautiful journey that we're on. And for anyone listening, you'll be able to find how to connect with him on the site. All right. Take care.
Thank you, Dave.